In that moment, it was absolutely noticeable to those people who'd been excluded from the coronation that nobody, let alone Kate, curtsied to Queen Camilla.
What does it take for a royal façade to finally crack? Some say it happens slowly, behind locked doors, but this time it shattered in an instant. Inside the palace, where whispers usually die in silence, a storm erupted when Camilla lashed out at Catherine right in front of stunned staff. Gasps cut through the air, not just for the sudden attack, but for what came next. For years, King Charles has carried himself as measured, composed, the steady hand guiding a fragile crown. But that night, all of it slipped. His anger wasn't royal, it wasn't rehearsed, it was raw, loud, and uncontrollable. Staff who had once bowed in trust stood frozen, torn between duty and disbelief, watching their monarch unravel before their eyes. This wasn't just another clash inside the palace. This was the kind of fracture that echoes across generations. A queen losing control, a king exploding in fury, and a monarchy suddenly exposed for what it truly is: fragile, human, and dangerously divided. What really happened inside those walls? And what does this mean for the future of the crown? Stay with us, because the truth behind this shocking moment will leave you speechless. A palace built on tension. The palace is often painted as a picture of elegance and order. Its tall gates, glittering halls, and age-old traditions seem to suggest stability, as if nothing could disturb the calm that has lasted for centuries. But behind those golden gates, the reality is far more complicated. Tension has always been part of the royal story, hidden behind polite smiles and carefully staged appearances. The truth is, every glance, every gesture, every whispered word carries weight inside those walls. And it is here, in this carefully balanced world, that Catherine and Camilla have walked very different paths. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, has steadily become the shining figure of the royal family. She is admired for her grace, her calm presence, and her ability to make people feel at ease. Crowds cheer her name, the media praises her elegance, and world leaders admire her steady charm. To many, she represents the monarchy's future, the bridge between ancient tradition and modern values. Her popularity has only grown stronger over the years, making her a central figure not only in Britain, but across the globe. Camilla's journey, however, has never been so simple. Her path has been marked with shadows and scars that she can never truly erase. From being labeled the other woman during Charles's marriage to Diana.
A glimpse into Charles and Diana's marriage from the very beginning. Charles, reportedly unsure about whether he wanted to propose to the 19-year-old Diana.
To eventually becoming queen consort, she has lived under constant public judgment. No matter how many royal duties she performs or how much effort she puts into her role, every smile is inspected, every step compared to Diana's memory, and every word weighed against Catherine's effortless charm. Inside the palace, this contrast is impossible to ignore. Staff members, who see the royals not on magazine covers but in quiet corridors and private meetings, have long noticed the unspoken rivalry. They whisper about frosty silences at dinner tables, about moments where a smile felt more like a mask, and about conversations that seemed colder than they should have been. Catherine's growing influence and Camilla's fragile standing created a quiet storm. A storm that grew silently year after year, unseen by the public, but impossible to hide from those who lived in the palace every day. And then came the breaking point. The day of the outburst was not the birth of tension, but rather the explosion of years of buried frustration. It wasn't a random argument, and it wasn't about one small issue. It was the weight of history pressing down, the clash of two women who symbolized different paths for the monarchy, finally colliding in the open. The palace, filled with centuries of history, became the stage for something no one expected to witness. In those moments, the gilded halls did not echo with tradition and order. They echoed with anger, fear, and the sound of control slipping away. What had always been whispered about in shadows finally came into the light, leaving staff stunned and the monarchy forever marked by the tension that could no longer be hidden. The attack that shocked the staff. The evening began like so many others inside the palace, quiet, formal, and wrapped in the comfort of routine. Catherine entered the room with her familiar grace, her steps light, her smile calm. She spoke politely with the staff, her gentle voice carrying across the hall. For the people working there, this was nothing unusual. Catherine always carried an air of warmth that made even the stiffest royal setting feel less heavy. But something was different this time, and it wasn't Catherine. All eyes eventually shifted toward Camilla. Her face told a story before her words ever did. Tight lips pressed together, eyes narrowed with unspoken frustration, and a sharpness in her presence that had been growing for weeks. Some staff had noticed her tension earlier, her clipped responses in meetings, her restless expressions during public appearances, but no one expected what was about to unfold. It happened suddenly, like a glass shattering without warning. Camilla's words sliced through the calm, sharp, and unforgiving. She lashed out at Catherine, questioning not only her choices, but her very role in the royal family. Her voice grew harder, accusing, even challenging Catherine's loyalty to the crown itself. The room froze. A hush swept over the staff. Some tried to hide their shock by shuffling papers or adjusting trays, desperate to appear busy. Others stood completely still, wide-eyed, as if glued to the floor. For many, it was the first time they had ever seen such a raw, unfiltered clash between two senior royals. This wasn't the controlled disagreement of two women speaking in private. This was loud, sharp, and public, a confrontation no one could ignore. Catherine, caught off guard, was stunned but not broken. She lowered her voice, tried to soften the rising heat in the room, and attempted to bring the moment back to calm. But Camilla's tone only grew louder, her words echoing against the high walls of the palace room. The staff had always known there were differences between Catherine and Camilla, but to see those differences burst into the open was something entirely different. The unwritten rule of palace life had always been clear. Disputes, no matter how fierce, stayed hidden behind closed doors. To break that rule, and to do so in front of servants and aides, was unthinkable. By the time the evening ended, the atmosphere felt heavy with shock. No one dared to speak of it out loud, but the silence said everything. Within hours, whispers spread down hallways, through the kitchens, and across the staff quarters. By the next morning, every corner of the palace knew. It wasn't just that Camilla had confronted Catherine. It was the way she had done it openly, fiercely, and in front of those sworn to silence. That, more than the words themselves, shook the palace. For the staff who witnessed it, the memory of that night would not fade easily. They knew they had seen something historic, something that would leave ripples far beyond the gilded walls where it had happened. Charles loses control, but the real turning point came not from Camilla's words, but from Charles's reaction. For decades, he had been portrayed as the patient heir, the man who waited longer than any other in British history to take the throne. He was seen as steady, cautious, measured a man who knew how to keep his emotions carefully hidden behind the polished smile of royalty. Even in moments when the public misunderstood him, Charles always tried to appear composed, a figure of quiet endurance who carried the weight of tradition with a kind of tired grace. Yet on this night, all of that restraint shattered in an instant. When he walked into the room and saw Camilla's attack unfold, something deep inside him finally snapped. His voice, usually calm and deliberate, erupted like thunder rolling through the halls of the palace. Staff later described the moment as if a storm had broken out of nowhere, crashing down with a force no one had expected. It was not the voice of a king issuing commands with authority. It was the voice of a man pushed beyond his limits, raw with anger and pain. For years, the people closest to Charles had only seen him as controlled, sometimes frustrated, sometimes weary, but never openly unhinged. To them, he was the man who could endure endless duties, long ceremonies, and unrelenting scrutiny without raising his voice. That night, however, the mask slipped. The controlled monarch vanished, replaced by a man who felt cornered, betrayed, and crushed beneath the very crown he had waited his entire life to wear. His fury wasn't only directed at Camilla. It was aimed at everything that had been building for years: the constant pressure of the throne, the endless expectations of the public, the weight of history pressing down on his shoulders. To Charles, the crown no longer seemed like a jewel-encrusted symbol of glory, but rather a heavy chain, binding him to duties that consumed him. His outburst was more than a husband scolding his wife. It was the roar of a man suffocating under obligations, anger spilling out after years of being bottled up. Those who witnessed it were shaken. They had served the monarchy long enough to know that every royal is human, yet seeing the king unravel in such a way was different. One member of staff whispered afterward that the room felt colder after his shout, as though the very walls of the palace had absorbed his rage. Another said it was the first time they truly understood how fragile the man behind the crown could be. For them, Charles was no longer untouchable. He was human, fragile, exhausted, and overwhelmed. And that was the most dangerous revelation of all. A king can be respected, admired, or even feared, but once he is seen as weak, cracks begin to form in the institution itself. This single moment of lost control became more than a private quarrel. It was a glimpse behind the curtain of monarchy. The carefully crafted image of dignity and strength was broken, replaced by the undeniable reality of a man under immense strain. Even though the palace walls are built to guard secrets, those present knew that something had shifted forever. Trust had been shaken. The loyalty of staff depends not only on duty, but also on belief in the steadiness of the crown. And once they saw the monarch unravel, once they witnessed the mask slip, they understood that it could never be fully repaired. A single outburst had rewritten how they viewed their king, not as an unbreakable figure of authority, but as a man battling storms within himself. The ripple effect, inside the palace. The aftermath of that explosive night spread through the palace like wildfire. It began in hushed tones, carried through corridors and servant quarters, whispered in corners where eyes darted nervously to be sure no one important was listening. But secrets in a palace are like smoke. They curl under doors, seep through cracks, and sooner or later find their way out. What had happened was too shocking, too raw to stay buried. Those who served the monarchy had always been trained in silence. Loyalty wasn't just encouraged, it was demanded. Every word, every gesture was bound by duty to protect the crown. Yet even the most disciplined among them could not ignore what they had seen. The king, the man they were sworn to serve with unwavering respect, had lost control before their very eyes. And once that mask of dignity slipped, it was impossible to pretend the moment had never occurred. In private, the staff began to divide. Some quietly sided with Catherine, deeply admiring the way she had held her composure during Camilla's attack. To them, Catherine embodied the grace and restraint that royalty required. She didn't raise her voice, didn't lash out, and even in the midst of chaos, her calm presence seemed to steady the atmosphere. Whispers praised her as the true heart of the monarchy, the one person who carried herself with the dignity expected of a future queen. Others, however, defended Camilla. They murmured that the weight on her shoulders had simply become unbearable. For years, she had fought to be accepted, to carve out a place in a royal family that never fully embraced her. The pressure was constant, the judgment relentless, and perhaps, they argued, anyone in her position would have eventually cracked. Camilla's defenders insisted she was not cruel, but tired, not unworthy, but misunderstood. Yet amid these differing loyalties, one truth bound everyone together. Charles's outburst had changed everything. Inside the palace, the delicate hierarchy is built on a foundation of respect. Staff may gossip in private, but in public they uphold the monarchy's image with precision. They bow, they serve, and they obey. But when a king loses control in front of his own household, that foundation begins to shake. Suddenly, the roles blur. Respect turns into doubt. Authority begins to feel fragile. Doubt is a dangerous seed inside royal walls. It starts small, quiet questions in the minds of servants and advisors. Is the monarchy truly as steady as it appears when the family waves from the balcony? Or is it weaker, crumbling under the surface, held together by rehearsed smiles and fragile tempers? Those questions, once asked, cannot be unasked. For Catherine, the incident only deepened her public image. She emerged as the quiet symbol of strength, the woman who had endured humiliation, yet stood her ground with grace. To the staff, and perhaps to the world beyond the palace gates, she represented stability at a time when the king himself faltered. Every whisper that praised her composure planted her more firmly in the hearts of those who watched. For Camilla, the fallout was far less kind. Old criticisms reawakened like ghosts, whispers that had followed her for years that she did not belong, that she was unfit for the crown, that she would never live up to the shadow of Diana, came rushing back with renewed force. Even her allies struggled to silence the murmurs that maybe, just maybe, this had proved the skeptics right. And for Charles, the moment carved a scar that no public appearance or carefully written speech could erase. A king is supposed to be the pillar of control, the one who steadies the kingdom no matter the storm. But now, among those who had seen him unravel, the image was broken. He was no longer untouchable. He was vulnerable. And that realization left a mark not just on his reign, but on the very perception of the monarchy itself. A reminder that the crown, no matter how dazzling, cannot hide the flaws of the man who wears it. What this means for the future. Royal scandals are never contained to a single evening or a single clash of words. They ripple outward like stones dropped in a pond, spreading into history and reshaping how the figures at the center are remembered. The confrontation between Camilla and Catherine, with Charles himself pushed to the edge, was not simply an argument overheard by staff, it was an event heavy with symbolism. Years from now, historians may look back and mark it as a turning point. A moment when the carefully polished image of the monarchy cracked in full view of those closest to it. For the public, stories like this strike deeper than palace gossip. To many, the monarchy represents tradition, stability, and continuity. But when reports of shouting and royal tempers slip through the golden gates, they feed doubt. People begin to wonder, if the royal household itself is divided, how can it possibly project unity to the nation? For Catherine's supporters, the incident only reinforces what they already believe, that she is the steady hand and graceful presence capable of carrying the crown into a new era. Her calm response, even in the face of a verbal attack, paints her as the very image of dignity. On the other side, critics of Camilla see this as undeniable proof of her ongoing struggle to fit the royal mold. Despite years of public service and attempts to win over skeptics, one public slip, even in front of staff, can reopen old wounds. For those who never accepted her rise to queen consort, this clash becomes ammunition, a reminder that she may never fully embody the role in the eyes of the people. But perhaps the heaviest weight rests on Charles's shoulders. His loss of composure in that moment revealed something deeper than frustration. It revealed a king already straining under the pressure of expectation, tradition, and family discord. The question that now lingers in the minds of many is whether he can rebuild trust both within his fractured household and among a public that witnessed his humanity in a way it was never meant to be seen. The monarchy has weathered storms before, but each one leaves scars. In a world that demands transparency and authenticity, this outburst threatens to expose the crown not as untouchable, but as fragile. And once that fragility has been revealed, it cannot easily be forgotten. The palace will carry the weight of this night for years to come. In the end, the palace walls could not hide what happened that night. Camilla's attack on Catherine was more than just words. It was a spark that revealed deep fractures within the royal family. Charles's reaction, his fury, breaking through centuries of royal composure, showed the world that even kings are not immune to human weakness. The image of calm order that the monarchy works so hard to project has been shaken. For Catherine, it may become another chapter in her story of resilience. For Camilla, it deepens the shadow of criticism she has always lived under. And for Charles, it raises questions that no crown can answer, about his strength, his control, and his ability to hold a family and a kingdom together. This was not just a private argument. It was a moment of history that staff witnessed with their own eyes, a moment that will echo long after the shouting has faded. So what do you think this means for the future of the monarchy? Will Catherine rise stronger, or will this divide leave scars too deep to heal? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your view. And don't forget, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss the latest updates on the royals. The truth is unfolding, and you won't want to miss what comes next.